look. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Board of Education. Tonight's Board of Education meeting will be split into two parts. The first will be a special meeting with action on two specific items that need approval before the end of the calendar year. There will be opportunities for public participation in the first session. We will then adjourn this first meeting and begin the second part of the evening's meeting agenda, which is the business meeting. This meeting will focus on the work of the district-wide committee focused on the potential use of armed security across the district. Mr. Defendini and Dr. Thompson will present the findings and recommendations of that committee. There will be an opportunity for the Board of Education to ask questions of the administrative team. The Board of Education respects the varied opinions of our community. While there will not be opportunities for public participation during the second portion of tonight's meeting agenda, any questions or comments can be shared with the board through our email address, boe@farmingdaleschools.org. District administrators are also available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for your anticipated courtesy and cooperation. In the event of fire and/or if you hear the fire bell, you must leave the building. The nearest exit is in the rear of this room. And now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Mr. Defendini, may we have your update on the action items on tonight's agenda?
Sure. So in simple form, there are two items that are being recommended to the Board of Education for your consideration this evening. The first is a amendment to a pilot agreement for the Courtyard and Marriott properties that are located on 110. The short is the pilot property in question was set to expire, and there was some negotiations that was going back and forth between the IDA, the Industrial Development Agency, which is the organization that obviously governs these types of agreements, with a few of the other government groups, us included. We had a chance with our attorneys to go back and forth a few times to make sure that two different circumstances were in play. One is that the actual agreement was more than, or at least the same as it is in current form for the upcoming year, and that each year thereafter, it went up by that 2% margin that we've been using for tax levy purposes. So we were able to work with them over the course of a few weeks, got them to come to agreement with what the terms of it needed to be, and that is being recommended for your action this evening. The second is an agreement with AFLAC, which is a provider that costs absolutely no no cost. There's no out-of-pocket cost to the district, but provides support for some uninsurable losses that could come in the event of extraordinary circumstances in people's lives. An example would be cancer, right? So there are certain expenses that our health insurance policy doesn't pick up. At the employee's expense, if they chose to, they could actually take part in the AFLAC plan. We would take payroll withholdings in order to be able to help them sponsor that. The opportunity to be a part of that plan, in which case they would get the benefits then to provide that support, God forbid, one of our employees were to be diagnosed, as an example, with cancer. So it's a benefit that's provided to our employees. That's no cost to the district. But again, we think it right to provide that level of support, in the current circumstance. Any questions? Great, thank you.
At this time, I'd like to open the meeting for our first public participation session. As always, please be sure to clearly state your name and address when you come to the microphone, which is located to my left and your right. The meeting is now yours. No? All right. Don't everyone run up to the microphone at once? Okay. Thank you, everybody. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion that the consent agenda consisting of items 1A and B be approved as whole with action recorded separately.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. That's it, right? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the meeting again for our second public participation session. Again, please state your name and address when coming to the microphone. All right, may I have a motion to adjourn this special meeting? Oh, 1 second. Okay, again, I'd make a motion to adjourn this evening's special meeting.
I make a motion to adjourn this special meeting of the Board of Education.
All in favor?
Aye.
This special meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. And now I'd like a motion to open the business meeting of the Board of Education.
I make a motion to open the business meeting of the Board of Education.
All in favor?
Aye.
At this time, Mr. Defendini and Dr. Thompson, the table is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. At the beginning of the year, we had worked together to set some goals and objectives for the upcoming school year. One of those goals was to explore the use of armed security within our schools and to put together a group of thoughtful people that represent a wide continuum of stakeholders here in Farmingdale to get a better understanding as to what are the thoughts that are coming from within our schools, what are the thoughts of our community, what are the thoughts of some of the first responders, and varying people that would obviously be impacted as a result of this decision, no less parents as well. So I'd like to thank Dr. Thompson, who's going to take over for a majority of this evening's presentation, to talk you through a little bit of the work that's been going on over the course of the last several months. I'd also like to thank several members of the committee that are also in the audience today for giving of their time to be and participate in this important work. It was important for us to solicit that insight from those various stakeholders, again, many of which are in the audience this evening. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Thompson with thanks to him and with thanks to the members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Defendini, and the board for this time to present the information gathered by our committee. As Mr. Defendini mentioned, we had a diverse group of stakeholders for this particular topic that included 22 committee members at the start from all walks of life in, with regard to our stakeholders. So we had retired law enforcement, we had teaching staff, we had parents, we had students. We knew that this is a very complex issue and a hot topic, and tried to convene a very diverse and heterogeneous group of stakeholders. So we had a lottery on September 1st. 125 people participated and submitted for participation on this committee, where you needed to commit to all of the dates that were set forth for the committee. And we had a live lottery, and it was live streamed to preserve the integrity of the lottery for participants, knowing that there were 125, as I mentioned, who are interested in this particular committee. And it just goes to show you the interest, the passion that folks have on both sides of this issue and how complex it is. But I also want to commend and thank the members of the committee, some of which who are sitting here in the audience, for their commitment to this over the course of the months that we worked on researching and providing information on both sides of the issue so that we could present what we found in our exploration. So I'll take you through 5 sections on this, including, as I started to mention, the committee process, the history on the topic of armed security, the research, presenting information both for and against, as was part of our charge, and the staff and community survey, as well as the student survey analysis, and finally we'll open up any questions and answers and provide some answers for you guys. During the Q&A portion, I'll invite members of the committee that are willing or that are interested in providing any answers that you may have, if that suits our Q&A at the end. So we started, as I mentioned, on September 1st with a very diverse group of stakeholders, 22 at the start of the committee process. We stressed the etiquette of this particular committee so that there wasn't screaming and yelling and passionate arguing about the particular topic. They had to be respectful of all members of the committee and presentation of ideas and collaborating. We often changed the iteration of who was working with whom so that we could make sure that you had to respect the perspectives of all members of the committee. So that was something that was at the forefront of every committee meeting. And again, I commend our committee members for maintaining that composure and that tact when discussing something that is very passionate to all of us. We, again, were respectful of dialogue. We started to look at research as part of our committee process. We considered different elements that may be of interest to the board. Some of the things that we'll talk about can't be drilled down unless you have a decision one way or another. So you can't be speaking in depth about the specificity of pricing if you're not talking about crossing that threshold in any way. So it wouldn't suit the committee to spend our efforts talking about a decision we don't know where the board will land on. So just telling you that in advance. And finally, what rose to a level of interest for everyone was what are the things that school districts have to consider if they cross this threshold. We were given the committee objective and purpose here to provide information on the topic of armed security. We were scheduled for November 15th, as that slide said. We postponed in light of an accident in Ohio similar to what we experienced here on September 21st. The key elements of our committee are listed here. We also had guest speakers on both sides of the issue. We had a guest speaker who was passionate against, we had a guest speaker who was passionate for, and was well-versed in on both sides. Those particular speakers had a level of expertise and interest and passion, rather, for speaking to our committee about the topic. So we started the exploration of this based on previous discussions from the board that started as far back maybe as 2021. How did we get to this discussion on armed security? And we'll take you through a couple of different things that have been of interest to communities, in particular around this. Oh, that's not a good glare on our screen. What we have here is really the legal wrangling, and you have a printout of the presentation, but I'll try to do my best for you folks in the audience. So the legal wrangling around this began with, it's probably been in place for about 50 years or so as we've worked to keep schools safe. In 1990, the Gun-Free Schools Act really set the stage, prohibiting all firearms within school zones. In 95, the Gun-Free Schools Act was amended because it impacted the Commerce Clause. And basically, the Supreme Court found that the Congress had overreached its authority in prohibiting guns in this way based on the Commerce Clause. So there was an amendment, but it really more or less put it in line with the overreach around the Commerce Clause. But it still held that there would be a gun-free school zone for all schools. 2005, there was a revision based on that, and based on an appeal, and the Supreme Court still held where it landed on the revision for the amendment originally, but there was a challenge here in 2005, and they still ruled in favor of the previous decision. It was tested, essentially. The revision was tested and still held in 2005. And then finally, there continues to be legislation, believe it or not, to repeal this prohibition. And that came in as soon as April of 23 this year, an attempt to repeal completely. It's a representative from Kentucky looking to repeal the Gun-Free Schools Act. So constantly seems as if it's in discussion legally, and there's been some wrangling for a long time. What this slide will indicate is, and what's in yellow here, shows an increase of incidents around school violence. Mass casualties have increased considerably. The number of law enforcement injured has increased considerably. Use of body armor has increased. We know that there is an increased access or availability of guns, whether it's legal or illegally, and this also indicates that there's been an increase in mass casualties. So those are the numbers that jump out in yellow, have more to do with the number of folks killed or wounded, and then including law enforcement, there's been an increase in the number of them. And the suggestion is from the beginning of the 2023 year, we're going to far eclipse this number exponentially with the number of casualties that have occurred in the 23 school year, or calendar year rather. This slide gives you a sense of how many school districts have crossed this threshold, which is an interesting look because some believe that most schools have in some way implemented armed security, and the fact is, especially on Long Island or specific to Long Island, of the 127 public schools, 10 have crossed this threshold at this point. This is dated February 15th, so as of February 15th, 7 had confirmed. I know of 2 since then that have been added, so there are at least 9 confirmed that have hired armed security. And again, you're roughly at 10% perhaps. That's a overestimate, but roughly 10% have hired armed security. So the minority have gone to this place, and the majority have still held armed security off of campuses. So we reviewed some scholarly research as a committee and presented both sides of the issue. And as I said, we collaborated with all. You had to take positions both for and against, regardless of your perspective, in our work as a committee. So it really made people find a place of neutrality when they were talking about the topics and the facts around this. The pros are on this page. I'm not going to read them to you, but what I can summarize for the reasons that are in favor of have to do with response time, specifically with armed or active shooters. The only way to stop or combat an active shooter is with fire yourself. So that can be a misnomer that I'll talk about a little bit with our cons, but it's believed that there will be more casualties the longer somebody is able to continue taking lives as an active shooter. So the only way to really stop an active shooter is with force yourself. And then response time has to do with being on location with the ability to respond right away. And then when you have armed security, they're more familiar with 2 things. They have a partnership and understand your SROs on the campus. So we have 2 or 3 officers that frequently interact with us and are familiar with our staff and with our building layout. And then the partnership in responding to an active shooter is there. They would know who the security guard is that's armed. The security guard that's armed could go in right away, understanding the layout better than perhaps a school resource officer because they're spending every day in the building. Our citations page for those facts on the previous slide. The reasons against, It seems that there have been an increase on campuses where there are armed security. Believe it or not, there are higher numbers of fatalities. Another summative point from this is oftentimes active shooters aren't deterred by the fact that there could be armed security or police that respond. In fact, because of mental health issues, many are in a position of suicide by cop or suicide by law enforcement, so they're willing to be killed in this act. And then there's only a small percentage, rather, of school shootings that have been linked to overall gun deaths. Again, our citations for the facts on the previous slide. So there are already some steps that schools can take to be proactive in protecting schools. We do many of these already. Our lockdown response and training and drilling around that, partnering with our SROs and working on things before they happen in terms of investigations when we're aware that there is a potential for somebody escalating to this point. Bystander reporting, that's a pretty high number of plots that are reported by peers. Threat assessment, as you know from our goals this school year, we've established a threat assessment team that is charged with assessing and reviewing an individual's potential for committing a violent act in school. So there's a committee that meets to discuss different individuals who have presented behaviors, said things, or are in a social emotional place where they could potentially commit an act, and we would be stepping in to intervene in those instances when, as a group reviewing this information. So rather than having things mentioned, or in schools where these things have been successful, but unfortunately, there are warning signs that are not acted on. Our threat assessment team would be responsible for that work. And then reducing or eliminating access to firearms. New laws and legislation, the IRPA law allows school administrators to go to the courts when they believe that somebody has a firearm and has made a threat or could potentially carry out this act. So we're empowered in that way so that we could respond appropriately. So we surveyed the students and we surveyed the community, so both the parents in the community and the teaching staff or the faculty in the community had access to the survey, as did the students. This thought question was there for students to consider. The survey was launched September 29 of 2023, and students had a very all over the place response in some ways. They understood the complexity of the issue, and what would come up for many of them in terms of their thoughts after they responded to the survey had to do with two things: either being against because of accidental access to a weapon that's on the campus, so somebody who's reckless and reaches for someone's firearm, or it's left somewhere that it shouldn't be, that a kid comes across it. And then they also saw the school threat and active shooter aspect of wanting it. So those were the thoughts that came up in the students' responses. If they were against it, it had to do with the accidental nature of having a weapon on campus and what could happen in those instances. And if they were for it, it had to do with, it was linked to language around active shooters. So each of the grades were asked to identify who they were. So you could see a majority of seniors responded. The student survey was open for a week, and this was not conducted in classrooms. And this was intentionally done so that individuals who didn't have the tact for having this kind of conversation weren't forced to do so because kids were taking a survey in their class. So rather than put people on the forefront of having to discuss this directly, it was provided to students, and those who wanted to participate did. About 145 participated, which is a low number, but it does cross a threshold for a valid amount when you do a survey. Do you feel physically safe and secure in your current school environment? I guess this is really good for us. The majority of kids feel safe. The majority of kids, some say 0% say they never feel safe. 5% said rarely, and then going upward from there, the majority of students feel safe. Would you feel comfortable having armed security at your school? In this instance, a majority said yes, I'm comfortable with having. 36, some said I don't know and I need more information, 35, and then 29 said no, I'm not comfortable. In each instance, they had the ability to respond, I am not comfortable. And that was true on both the parent and teacher survey as well as the students. So there was always an opportunity to just say, I do not want armed security in schools. So this is based on frequency, this word cloud, and the word that comes up the most is kid and weapon and someone. So the random nature of someone having a weapon, you can devise from some of this. This is also a tough glare. What I'll point to on this slide in particular is toward this end where it's darkest is the correlation of yes or no. That's yes in favor, 1 at each building. And as it gets darker, which is this area here is the darkest, is the highest percentage, where 14.3% said, or rather 42.9% in total of students said 1 at each building would be the best format or the structure for having them, versus 29% on this far end who said I'm not in favor. One patrolling the hallways at Farmingdale High School, or the hallways in general, but it was only issued to high school students, and 1 patrolling the buildings within the district. So 1 particular individual assigned to the whole campus, and on the far end is 1 at each building, and in the middle is 1 patrolling the hallways. I am not sure I need more information, and I am not in favor on the far right. And again, 42% total participants said that 1 at each school building, and then you had 5 patrolling the buildings, 1 individual patrolling all buildings. 17.9% was patrolling hallways. 4.5, I'm not sure, I need more information. And 29.5, I'm not in favor of armed security. But again, that's still a majority that would say 1 at each school building because 42.9% said that. Staff and community survey results, similar thought in the survey. What you can surmise from this particular summary of all responses, participants were in favor of having armed security guards. You'll notice that it'll be broken down for both teachers and then parents and community members. But even when it came to our teaching staff, there was a majority there. The district should focus on building security and mental health rather than armed security, was the suggestion from participants in general. But again, you'll notice from the survey, what stood out the most, both for the committee and for the survey, was the need for training if you ever cross this threshold. The most trained individuals would be the ones that you would employ to work with. And that was a discussion for both the committee, and it came out in the survey. So you have 412 participants who were district employees. You have 1,815 from the community or parents and family, a large number of community participants, a very important issue in that regard based on the participation. What would be the optimal structure? You have concealed at the top. I'll explain. Concealed out, it means that you don't know that the person is armed. They're in the building. It's in a holster, but you cannot see it versus what you might see at Penn Station sometimes when they're there and you see a rifle there and you see a canine there, and it's very clear that there's a level of security. But concealed would be in a holster, not visible. Displayed means out, like a Nassau County police officer. You see it right on their hip. you know that they're carrying. I'm not sure, I need more information, is 13%. And then I'm not in favor, 16%. And based on the percentages, again, you still have a majority that would consider how and what format for armed security. Again, 50% at the top is one at each building. 7% is one patrolling all buildings, so one individual assigned to the entire campus is 7%. 18% is one patrolling the hallways. 9%, I'm not sure, I need more information, and I'm not in favor of armed security, was 15%. The word cloud, again, here's the frequency here. Words that stand out, the priority for this, the training. It's most said that this was a level of safety for kids. This was a level of protection for students in schools, and that the need for training would have to be there if you went down this road. I'll walk you through this again because of the glare. The bottom left is the darkest and the highest correlation. 42.7% of parents and family members, okay? 42.7 on parents and family, and 7.8, which is the highest of the district employees, because they're breaking it out based on the percentage of that whole number, right? The combination of district staff and parents and community members is broken out here. So there's 42% of parents and family members who would say one at each building, 7.8% of district employees, which is the highest of all the other categories for teachers and staff members. 1% said one patrolling all buildings across the campus, 5.8% of parents and family members. 2.9 said one patrolling the hallways, 15% of parents and family members. 2% said I'm not sure, 6.9 of parents and family members. And then I'm not in favor of armed security, 4%, 4.4%, and 10.9%. So again, there's still a majority who would be in favor of some iteration of armed security based on the surveys of both the students and the parents and staff. And with that, I will open the floor for any questions and do my best to provide all the answers you need.
Dr.
Oh, go ahead. No. So of the 9 districts that we believe there's 9 right now on Long Island that are participating in this, do we know, generally speaking, what their model looks like? Are they concealed? Are they one person versus one in every building? Is there like a trend in what they're doing? I'm just curious.
So the ones that I know of have been clear about keeping them out of the building. That seems to be a trend. Even more of a minority to have them in the building and walking the halls. It's outside. It's patrolling the district properties. One at each building, the thinking would be probably the response. If you're on the other side of the campus and there's an incident and it takes you 4 minutes, 5 minutes, that takes a lot of time to respond. Our local law enforcement would be here in that amount of time from a 911, from a push-button lockdown system. The safest thing you can do, if we're just talking about an active shooter, is lock down. Get behind a locked door, lock yourself in, and be there until law enforcement arrives. But the majority are outside in some capacity, but not in the building, and not, screening visitors, not displayed. They're concealed. You often don't know who it is, unless you're familiar with every staff member on the campus. So I know that's true for at least 3 of the 7 listed in that graphic.
So Sam, in reference to what Suzanne said, the districts that you started with that gave their opinion or have, the 10 of them that have the armed personnel now, do you know, or does the committee know if they were being proactive or reactive, or have they, any of them had situations that led them to have this trade security with, that are armed?
So that's a good question, because there hasn't been an active shooter incident on Long Island. Yeah, I'm sorry. So that's whether or not they're being proactive to an active shooter. But there's a couple of different, I guess, when you think about why they would go there if there hasn't been that reason, because that's a strong reason for the folks who say no. The argument there is, why are we doing this if we've not ever had an active shooter in our building? And then the argument for them is, for the people who are in favor, is, well, why are you waiting for an active shooter to respond with armed security? So those are the two, opposing factors on there. Some who say, don't do this, we've never had, so why are we doing it? And then the folks who say, you should do it before you do, and then have casualties. Or if they had them at this place or that place, maybe the outcome would have been different. Why are you waiting to have that in order to implement something like this, is really the argument. So no, it's not in response to an active shooter, but for one reason or another, those communities were in favor of having armed security.
I might have missed it. Did you mention the percentage of people in our community that did not participate?
That did not participate in the survey at all?
Yeah, because you gave numbers of how many said this, how many said that, what our makeup is of, and how many did not. Because 42% is a number, but if a lot of people did not participate, it could be a smaller number based on the amount of people. Just curious.
I know that 15% is a valid sample size, and we exceeded the 15% in both. So it would be a valid sample size to base a response on, a response for the folks who did complete the survey. So that's really where we didn't send it to general community members without students in the district. So it didn't go to like our voter group at large. It went to people who have children in the buildings.
Sam, are you at liberty to tell us who the experts were and what their recommendations were, pro and con specifically?
The guest speakers?
Yes.
I don't want to name them.
That's fine. Without naming them, what was the general tenor of the pros versus the general tenor of the cons?
So the individual who was against is a parent of a child in one of our elementary schools, wanted it to be known that this is not a step you take. It's essentially lethal supervision of children, and why would we invite weapons on a school campus is what information and research, there were certain facts he wanted the committee to consider in that presentation. The individual who was in favor offered perspectives on both sides and is an active law enforcement member, but really did a balanced job for the committee, presenting actually both sides. Like personally, his opinion was not for or against. He wanted us to be informed as an expert on the topic and on training and on active shooter response on what the benefits would be, and he provided that, but did not say that we need to do this or that we don't need to do this. And he was very clear in the onset. But he was a active law enforcement individual.
Secondarily, in those districts that have armed personnel on the school campuses, are they dressed in a way that is conspicuous so that the community knows that they are the armed person, or is it more of an undercover role where only certain members of law enforcement would know that that person is armed?
So it could be both. Private companies that are employed for this job, which is probably the way most school districts have gone. The private company reduces some of the district's liability because they're responsible for their training and for their licensing of the individuals. So the liability falls on them because that's their area of expertise and that's what they're contracting for. They would typically have a uniform separate from a green polo like our security aides would wear. So they would be identifiable to law enforcement especially, so that law enforcement can identify them if they were responding to an active shooter scenario. And you could go as far as saying on Mondays they wear this color, on Tuesdays they wear this color, on Wednesdays they wear this color, just so that it's not widely known who these individuals are. A lot of time they're very present at arrival when you're most vulnerable perhaps, or dismissal when you're vulnerable, and they may be very close to the entrances to the school or where people are, the highest traffic is, and those high traffic times. So you may pick up on that, the fact that these individuals are always here when we arrive to school, and then, you know, they kind of disperse to different locations around the district, and then they're back, it seems, at times when school buildings are letting out. So that is probably a time when most buildings are on high alert, because there are a lot of people coming in and out at those times. So they position themselves outside, and that those are things that are decided. They're not going to be in our buildings. They're not going to be. And those are things that are part of the discussion if you engage in that discussion.
Sam, I know you said that there was a active law enforcement gentlemen or ladies in the committee. Was Nassau County or Homeland Security involved in this committee at all, or was this strictly community members?
We have a retired Nassau County detective who's part of the committee, so that answers.
No, but I meant like actual Nassau County sent a representative for this committee. Were they invited?
So they were.
Or Homeland Security?
So they were invited, and they were advised not to provide their opinion one way or another. So they had the ability, and they kind of gave us some information, but they were advised by their higher-ups not to provide a specific opinion. Ideally, if we were allowed and we had the money as a county to allow them to assign their people to our campuses, that's one of the kind of middle grounds that we may never get to because of the cost. They would need additional personnel. They'd have every school in the county saying, sign me up, I want an assigned Nassau County police officer at the front of our building when kids are arriving or when they're leaving, but probably not a place we'll ever get to because of the cost. They'd have to hire that many more, 127 on Long Island, build districts, let alone buildings. So it would be complicated to do, but that would be the best middle ground, in my opinion.
Sam, when you were mentioning the cost, what would we be looking at if this was something we decided to pursue? What are the tentative costs for that?
So roughly, what districts are paying for the private security firms is between $50 and $55 an hour for an individual. So, you know, multiply that by 6 buildings, so it would be 6 individuals, and then a 40-hour week.
So Sam, I was going to ask, actually, Mike, the same question you had asked. With the police department, Homeland Security, and police commissioner as well, a group, so you had a person or two representing. Has there been or will there be discussion with more of a group of the police officers, Nassau, Suffolk, like Mike said, Homeland Security, as to would it be helpful or hinder? I know they can't give their personal opinions, but I'm sure we'd all work together. But has that discussion, or will that be a discussion?
I hope so. I don't. I know that, again, they've offered opinion, and they want it to work. They've also said, in terms of Nassau County, that their response time is pretty good also. So, you know, some would say that their response time could suffice. But again, if you're the person who says one casualty is enough, you know, do you want that? And for somebody to just, in an active shooter scenario, it could be immediate, and it doesn't give an opportunity for response. And that's the majority of the scenario that people are thinking about when you're bringing in armed security. It's not necessarily for any other scenario, which is why districts have said you must stay outside of our buildings. You're not responding to a fist fight, a knife, Your only to respond could be the condition. The only time you're allowed to step foot on property or come into the building is if there's an active shooter.
What about weapons? I know there's several different types of guns. Was there a discussion of what type of gun would be appropriate to use? Because, out there's so many different ones. One has, well, I don't explain them.
So the issue around the guns discussed by the committee had more to do with scenarios that have been successful, let's say, where the armed security officer didn't have ample firepower because the perpetrator was armed with, magazines and AKs and things along those lines, automatic weapons, and so there's a suggestion, and I believe 9mm are what most county law enforcement carry, and then what if you're out-armed by the perpetrator? So that was part of the discussion among the committee, more so than which one would be ideal, because you may not, you don't know what you're responding to is part of the hard part. Like if you think about Parkland, you don't know you're responding to that firepower.
So Sam, how many districts you said about 8% of the districts on Long Island who are doing this right now? The 10 districts, how many districts are using in-house retired cops? And how many districts are going out and using a company?
The majority are, so private companies could hire retired law enforcement, so it would be mixed. But the majority of districts that have crossed the threshold have used private companies. And there are about 3 out there right now that are really the top ones that are being chosen for school districts on Long Island.
How many districts are using, retired cops now? Let's say they want to do this.
You can't use them in that capacity without training, and the liability increases if it's your own staff member.
I know Smithtown does it. Smithtown hires from a list and they use their own security that they hire, that they use for, they have armed and not armed.
So I don't know which ones are hiring their own. I know the majority use a private. I don't know specifically which ones hire their own. And then if you hire your own, it could be more expensive for your liability, your insurance. If you're training your own individual and letting them get, New York State laws are very strict. The only scenario that they allow armed is if it's the special carry. And then again, it impacts your liability insurance. So we probably wouldn't want to go there because it's going to be a different cost threshold than it would be for a private company, where you're established and the private company carries the liability and the school district does not, versus training some of our own people to carry concealed or displayed.
So Smithtown does have it. Is there a way of finding out if Smithtown pays the liability and stuff?
We could ask. Yeah, we could ask.
And Sam, if we're using a private company, we're still directing them, though, correct? If it's not the private company, we're still in charge of
Yes,
their actions and
Yes.
where they are, and
yes. That's why I was saying you could direct them to never step foot on campus or be in the building unless there's an active shooter, which is coming from our direction, absolutely. And those are contracted companies, so we would work on the contract and what exactly we would expect in that way.
Sam, on the hypothetical, we had them here. I know the amount of time and training that's been done with what we have now, right? There's been a robust amount of security and safety training done with our staff, drills with our students, so on and so forth. Would there be any impact to what already is if we were to bring in armed guards? Like, would we need our staff to be retrained on certain things because our protocols would change? I'm just curious if it impacts beyond that one person at each building, let's just say.
It depends. One person in each building is probably the lower end of the survey, if we were going by that. The majority did not want them in the building. And if they're not part of our training protocols with our staff, because our training protocols use the best method, which is lockdown. So they wouldn't be part of participating in a lockdown with us or an evacuation. Those are really because you need immediate response if there's an incident like this. The immediate response and the best method is to get behind a locked door, lock yourself in, wait for law enforcement, barricade if you can, not visible, and we're prepared with that. Our infrastructure provides that in a good way. So that they wouldn't be added to our training, in my opinion, and we probably wouldn't identify them in that way by having them work through different protocols and drills, but I don't know. To be honest, Suzanne, that's a difficult question.
Well, I'm just kind of,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, the scenario, right? The God forbid scenario of a situation happening at one of the buildings. We have our lockdowns in place. We have our buttons that secure our perimeters, keeps our students and our students and staff safe within our buildings. That would obviously change because if something's happening on the outside, that communication needs to then be communicated back to the inside, and who's responsible for that. So I'm just thinking ahead that it would definitely impact someone at each location, and I'm just, like I said, curious about the thought process of the protocols in place, because it would require more training for whatever change that might occur if we were to do something like that. Does that make sense? Or?
And we currently invite Nassau County to partner with us for our drills. They're observers, so they come in and they make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do and that they know what it looks like when they're in our building if they have to respond. So it doesn't directly impact our drilling in that way, but they're in to observe what our lockdown looks like so that they know what our stay in place looks like, what our shelter in place looks like, so that they know what to expect if they're called to the building to respond.
And Dr. Thompson, in those districts that have armed security, have any of those districts given consideration to extending their hours for the after-school activities such as extracurricular clubs or sports or games in that matter, where parents or public are coming into the schools to watch those games?
So I'd have to follow up if they're around the clock, but it's expensive to have them during the day. And I know they prioritize hours that school is in session. But I'd have to follow up to know how maybe they reduce the number that are on after hours, but they're still somewhere on campus if they're around the clock. I don't know specifically around the hours.
So you'd have to have, not that I'm counting or going money-wise, but you'd have to have more than one in the building as per breaks or illness or whatever. You'd have to have a roving somebody that's gonna be able to pick up something that if someone's hired at each building, you're gonna need a break at some point, right?
And if you hire a company to cover, and the expectation is there's one at each building, that's their responsibility to provide that.
I think I have a question. Who would be responsible for the checks and balances on the individuals that would be doing that job? So if they're the ones that are professionally trained, who's overlooking to see that they're doing what they're supposed to do? Is that us? Is that the third-party company in which we would be contracting them through? How would that work? Do we know?
So the private companies are responsible for training their individuals and providing us with information on the training and the vetting, the background checks, the tests that require both that they're licensed and that they're trained to do this work is on the private company's responsibility. If we were training our own, we would have to follow the protocols and provide that to the individuals that we were training to be our staff members who are armed. We'd have to follow the protocols outlined in the state in order to do that.
But I'm looking at the fact that they're already here, they're employed. Who overlooks that they're doing what they're supposed to do on the perimeter? Who would be responsible, us or?
Both. So they have a boss that they answer to if they're a private company, and we have our individual supervisors of security as a district that look after making sure that our security staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we're going to know and work with what are they supposed to be doing, and are they actually doing that? And if not, then we would report to their boss that they're not doing what they're supposed to be, or that they're ready and able to do what they're supposed to do in the same way with regard to training and vetting. So it would be part of the partnership in hiring an outside company. And if it was our own, we would be responsible for that oversight as well. But if it's an outside individual company, they do have a boss that would be providing to us the information that we would want to be confident, right? Like we're asking about, knowing that they're vetted, knowing that they're in their right posts and such. Is that what, yeah. So that it would be both in collaboration.
So Sam, during the somewhat conversations that you had with the group, and we thank the group for getting together and doing that, that's really important, was there anything besides armed security? Was there any talk about mental wellness and stuff, mental wellness and what to add to the armed security if possible, or was it just focused on armed security?
It really was focused on security, and what came out of the survey, Kathy, focused on what about mental health? Like if we can do a better job addressing and supporting mental health, we wouldn't be talking about this increase in X, Y, and Z. But the committee did focus mostly on armed security as opposed to mental health. We knew that we knew that some of the characteristics of individuals included issues with mental health.
Sorry. On the participation breakdown, 143 students participated. How many kids do we have in the district that did not participate? What's that number altogether in percentage?
There are 1,580 students currently at the high school. We issued this to the high school students only. And so roughly 1,400 and change, 1,420 or so did not participate. And that was with a week open. I met with a particular group that works with us on legislative action. And I went to them specifically during their meeting and said, hey guys, we sent this out, not a lot of participation, what happened? And some of the response that they gave was, oh, we didn't really think about it or know that it was gonna close after a week, but it did say how long it would be open, and we did send them a reminder saying it's gonna close. It could just be teenagers. At the same time, it wasn't done where it was led in class, and some of them said, how come we couldn't do it in our class with our teacher, where the teacher could dedicate, all right, stop everything, take 15 minutes, respond to this survey. You know, that would have generated a higher response rather than almost like it's up to you to participate. So it also would have been, again, us directing kids to participate in that way, and individuals in the classrooms having a conversation, whether they wanted to or not, about this particular political issue where it could turn south really quickly. So it was intentionally not asked for staff to direct kids in that way.
No, I
So
get it.
so it just was left to kids to do on their own. And so that may have been part of why a lot didn't participate.
I was just hoping to see more kids participate. and
Me
Give me
too.
a better idea, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it definitely skews what we're looking at over here, at 1,500 kids. You know what I'm saying?
And we crossed the threshold for a
Yeah.
valid sample
Well,
size.
it's less than 1%. I mean, it's, you know, you have less than 1% who is really participating in this, so that's not a threshold, in my opinion, that I
No,
would think
it's not
that's.
less than 1%, it's 10%.
It's 10%?
Yeah.
My bad. So
Yeah.
10%. But I would still like to see more kids participating because, you know, you're bringing a gun into, you know, on the grounds and, you know,
I agree.
it's just something that kids have to be comfortable with too at the same time, you know. But same
So
thing with
that-
the participation level with the community. You know, I like to see more community members answer that question because it's a low percentage too.
Did the parents that participate, were they only at the high school or all the other schools as well? Excuse me?
It was on Parent Square sent to.
All right.
all
So-
parents.
So, was the reason, I know the middle school kids are younger. Was there a reason why they weren't tapped in, even like the 8th or 7th graders, because of their age? And, okay, well, you can
Yes.
tell that. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Absolutely.
You thought it was just start at the high school would be the best place to go, too young to,
In terms of the maturation for
Right.
talking about that
Yes.
issue, yes.
thank you. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So with that being said, again, providing this is something that happens, right? Whether it be here or we can, maybe you know the answer from other districts that are currently doing this. How do they present this to the students? Do they present this to the students? Is there an assembly given to the students? You know, we have young kids that, you know, can overhear household conversations, whether their parents are for or against it, and it could impact how a student functions during the course of the day, as well as our staff. You know, everybody has their own opinion, and obviously it's a very varied, you know, matter of opinion. Is there anything in place to help bring something like that forward for the students and staff?
We'd have to be very thoughtful as a district to do that. We'd have to be very thoughtful in the tact involved for communicating it, yes, and for preparing that implementation, yes. And you're spot on, Suzanne, because one of the reasons against this has to do with kids not being fearful of the fact that there is armed security. So that impacts attendance for certain categories of students, and that's in the research. So we'd have to be very thoughtful in discussing this and introducing this. I don't know what strategies specifically that those districts use, but that would be something we would certainly tap if the board decided to go in that direction, because we need to know how to prepare for an implementation like that. I don't know if you wanted to comment at all, but no, the answer I would give is that's going to take a lot of thought and preparation in order to prepare that kind of communication if you cross that threshold.
And again, based upon the maturation level of the child in question, because a conversation with a high school student would be very different than that of a middle, and certainly than that of an elementary school student, where you might not say anything at all because it's not even on their radar. So, you know, these are conversations that we would have obviously post, decision.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Defadini, Dr. Thompson, and of course the committee members that took part in this very important work. Obviously, this is something that is very important to everybody. Everyone wants the best for our kids here in their district. A lot more work to be done, but we do thank all of you for the incredible amount of work you've done thus far. We really do appreciate it.
Mr. Morales, if there's anybody from the committee who does have any words that you want to offer to the board, or any questions that you think you can expand on based on my answers, I'd like to give them that opportunity. I really commend the work of this committee. It was an amazing group, very difficult, polar opposite perspectives, and they all met in the middle for this very meaningful discussion. So again, thank you, and hats off to this particular committee who committed to a long hours. We were meeting at 6:30 at night until about 8 o'clock on these meetings, and our staff, we had staff members as well in the audience who were part of this committee. So if there are any members of the committee who would like to offer any information that I missed or thought is beneficial for the board to know, by any means, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. We really do appreciate your work.
Very much.
And with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks again, everybody. Happy holidays. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys soon.